January 5th, 1943. 02:18 hours. USS Helena, Guadalcanal. Lieutenant Russell Red Cochran gripped the firing controls of Mount 52, tracking a Japanese Valdive bomber descending through scattered moonlight toward the American cruiser line. His finger tensed on the trigger as the aircraft entered the kill zone, 2,800 yards and closing fast. What Cochran didn't know was that the shells he was about to fire contained technology so secret that even he, the gun mount captain, hadn't been fully briefed on its capabilities. "Commence firing," came the order through his headphones. The 5-inch gun roared, sending its projectile skyward at 2,600 feet per second. Inside that shell, a miniaturized radar, set no larger than a light bulb, began transmitting radio waves at 180 megahertz, listening for their return. When the echo indicated the VAL was within 70 feet, the fuse made its decision: detonation. The aircraft disintegrated 2,100 yards from Helena, transformed into burning fragments by a shell that never touched it. Cochran had just achieved the first verified combat kill using a proximity fuse, though the achievement would remain classified for another 2 years. The technology packed into that shell, formerly designated VT for variable time to disguise its true nature, would transform naval warfare in ways that neither Cochran nor the Japanese pilot could have imagined. By war's end, this marriage of radar and explosives would destroy thousands of kamikaze aircraft, turning Japan's weapon of desperation into a predictably defeated tactic. The mathematics of salvation were being written in vacuum tubes and radio waves. Within 2 years, proximity fuses would achieve what courage and conventional weapons could not: the systematic defeat of pilots willing to die. The kamikaze threat emerged from strategic mathematics that offered Japan no favourable solutions. By October 1944, after the catastrophic losses at the Philippine Sea, where American forces destroyed 645 Japanese aircraft while losing only 123, conventional aerial attacks had become exercises in futility. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, commanding the 1st Air Fleet in the Philippines, faced the arithmetic of defeat: fewer than 100 operational aircraft against an American invasion fleet of over 700 ships. On October 19, 1944, at Mabalacat Airfield, Onishi presented his solution to the staff of the 201st Air Group. Captain Rikihei Inoguchi recorded his exact words: "The salvation of our country can only come from spirited young men willing to sacrifice their lives by body-crashing enemy carriers." The logic seemed irrefutable. Conventional bombing achieved hit rates below 10% against manoeuvring warships. A piloted aircraft, guided until impact, could theoretically achieve 50% success rates. One pilot, one aircraft, potentially one ship. In Japan's desperate calculus, this equation offered hope. The first organised kamikaze attack struck on October 25, 1944. Lieutenant Yukio Seki led 5 Zero fighters of the Shimpu Special Attack Unit against American escort carriers off Samar. Each aircraft carried a 250-kilogram bomb. Each pilot carried poems for their families and photographs of Emperor Hirohito. They achieved what months of conventional attacks had failed to accomplish: direct hits on American carriers. USS Santee suffered a kamikaze strike, killing 16 sailors. USS Suwannee was hit minutes later. Commander David McCampbell, the Navy's leading ace with 34 victories, wrote in his action report, "This is a form of attack that is impossible to stop completely. No amount of pilot skill can guarantee interception of every attacker. We are facing an enemy who has weaponized death itself." Before proximity fuses became widespread, naval anti-aircraft defense relied on 3 weapon systems, each with critical limitations that kamikaze tactics ruthlessly exploited. The 5-inch 38 caliber dual-purpose guns formed the outer defensive ring, engaging targets between 10,000 and 18,000 yards. These fired shells with mechanical time fuses that required manual setting before loading. Fire control officers used the Mark 37 gunfire control system, an analog computer calculating where an aircraft would be when the shell arrived. Against a predictable bomber at 200 miles per hour maintaining steady altitude, the system functioned adequately. Against a kamikaze at 400 miles per hour in a terminal dive, constantly manoeuvring, it became almost useless. Gunner's Mate First Class James Morrison of USS Enterprise described the frustration. "We'd calculate for 4.5 seconds, expecting the plane at 8,000 feet, but kamikazes would dive, climb, slip sideways, anything to throw off our solution. By the time our shell exploded, the plane was hundreds of feet away. We were fighting geometry with arithmetic." The 40mm Bofors guns provided intermediate defence between 4,000 and 6,000 yards. These fired contact-fused shells requiring direct hits. Against a diving kamikaze presenting a frontal target of less than 80 square feet, gunners had to achieve direct hits on targets moving at 400 to 500 miles per hour. Statistical analysis showed single-round hit probability below 0.3%. Chief Petty Officer Harold Stassen, commanding a quad 40mm mount on USS Hornet, testified, "We'd fire 480 rounds per minute, traces everywhere, and watch the kamikaze fly straight through. Even when we hit them, unless we destroyed the engine or killed the pilot instantly, momentum carried them into the ship." The 20mm Oerlikon cannons formed the final defensive line at 2,000 yards or less. By the time a kamikaze entered their range, impact was typically 5 seconds away. These weapons fired shells so small that multiple hits were required for structural destruction. Seaman First Class Robert Baker, an Oerlikon gunner on USS Missouri, recalled, "At 2,000 yards, you had maybe 4 seconds. Your mind went blank, you just held the trigger and prayed. Even if you shredded the wings, the fuselage kept coming." The proximity fuses development began not with kamikazes, but with German bombers over London. During the 1940 Blitz, British anti-aircraft batteries required an average of 18,500 shells to destroy one bomber. The mathematics were unsustainable. Shells had to be set for specific altitudes, but bombers constantly changed height. A shell detonating 100 feet from a bomber inflicted no damage. One exploding within 30 feet was lethal. In September 1940, Sir Henry Tizard arrived in Washington carrying Britain's most precious military secrets in a black metal deed box, offered freely to America in exchange for production capacity. Among them was a concept for miniaturized radar that could fit inside an artillery shell. The assignment went to Section T of the National Defense Research Committee, led by Dr. Merle Tuve at what would become Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory. The challenges seemed insurmountable. Create a device smaller than a coffee cup, sturdy enough to survive 20,000 times the force of gravity when fired, sophisticated enough to distinguish aircraft from ground returns, and cheap enough for mass production. The breakthrough came from physicist James Van Allen, later discoverer of the radiation belts surrounding Earth. Van Allen proposed using hearing aid vacuum tubes, the smallest available, which could potentially survive the massive acceleration of gunfire. These tubes, designed for deaf patients' earpieces, would have to function after experiencing forces that would crush ordinary electronics. By December 1942, the team had created a working prototype. The Mark 32 fuse contained 5 vacuum tubes, a battery activated by firing setback, an oscillator generating radio waves at 180 MHz, and a therotron switch triggering detonation when return signal strength indicated a target within lethal radius. The entire device measured 3 inches long and weighed 11 ounces. The first combat test had occurred with USS Helena on January 5, 1943, but widespread Pacific deployment awaited resolution of security concerns. The Navy feared the technology might be captured and copied if used over land. By October 1944, as kamikaze attacks began, The United States had manufactured over 1 million proximity fuses at $18 each, expensive compared to conventional fuses, but insignificant compared to ships they would protect. Production facilities in Cleveland, Cincinnati, and Bridgeport were manufacturing 40,000 fuses daily, primarily using female workers who didn't know what they were assembling. The fuses arrived at Pacific Fleet bases in crates marked "Special Ammunition, Handle with Care." Security remained so tight that most gunnery officers received only basic operating instructions without understanding the technology. The shells appeared identical to conventional rounds, except for a small plastic nose cone protecting the radio antenna. Captain Willis Lee, commanding Battleship Division 7, received the first major shipment of 5-inch proximity-fused shells in November 1944. His gunnery officer, Commander Edwin Hooper, recalled, "They told us these shells would triple our effectiveness against aircraft. We thought it was propaganda until we saw them work." The proximity fuse operated on elegant physics principles. As the shell approached an aircraft, transmitted radio waves would reflect back with increasing strength. When the return signal indicated the target was within lethal radius, typically 70 feet for a 5-inch shell, the fuse triggered detonation. The explosion created a sphere of steel fragments expanding at supersonic speed, each fragment capable of penetrating aircraft aluminum at 200 yards. The truly revolutionary aspect was discrimination capability. Rain, clouds, and chaff didn't provide sufficient radar return for triggering. Ground return was filtered out by Doppler shift, the same phenomenon that changes a train whistle's pitch as it passes. Only the rapid closure rate with an aircraft created the precise conditions for detonation. The invasion of Okinawa, beginning April 1, 1945, became the proximity fuse's supreme test against massed kamikaze attacks. The Japanese launched the Kikusui, floating chrysanthemums, operations, 10 massive waves totaling approximately 1,900 kamikaze sorties over 3 months. For the first time, the majority of American ships carried proximity-fused ammunition for all calibers, from 5-inch down to 40 mm. The first Kikusui attack on April 6, 1945, coincided with Operation Tengo, the battleship Yamato's suicide sortie. Kikusui I involved 355 kamikaze aircraft and 344 conventional fighters. At 1500 hours, radar screens aboard USS El Dorado showed what operators called a snowstorm, so many aircraft that individual returns merged into a solid mass. Fire Controlman Second Class Eugene Hardy aboard destroyer USS Newcomb described the action. They came in waves, one after another. Our 5-inchers opened up at 12,000 yards. We could see black puffs way out there and planes falling, not diving, falling broken. The proximity fuses were turning near misses into kills. USS Laffey's April 16th ordeal provided the most dramatic demonstration. At Radar Picket Station No. 1, the destroyer faced 22 kamikaze aircraft in 80 minutes. Her crew fired 637 rounds of proximity-fused 5-inch ammunition. Despite being struck by 6 kamikazes and 4 bombs, Laffey survived, her guns destroying at least 9 attackers. The proximity fuses created what survivors called a wall of steel around the ship. Commander Frederick Beckton, Laffey's captain, reported, "The proximity fuses saved us. We'd see a kamikaze boring in, our guns would fire, and the plane would disappear, not shot down, but disintegrated. The fuses turned our defensive fire from probability into certainty." Statistics from Okinawa revealed the transformation. Ships equipped with proximity fuses destroyed kamikaze aircraft at rates 7 times higher than those using conventional ammunition. The difference translated directly into lives and ships saved. Japanese pilots quickly recognized something fundamental had changed in American anti-aircraft capabilities, though they never understood what. Lieutenant Commander Tadashi Minobe, who flew escort for kamikaze missions, testified after the war. Beginning in late 1944, American anti-aircraft fire became supernatural. Planes would explode without being hit. Our pilots reported that Americans had deployed invisible wires or aerial mines. Captured Japanese documents revealed growing confusion. A tactical bulletin from the 201st Air Group dated December 1944 stated, "Enemy anti-aircraft effectiveness has increased dramatically. Shells appear to detonate by proximity rather than contact. Recommend irregular flight paths and extreme diving angles." The Japanese developed various theories: magnetic fuses attracted to engines, infrared sensors detecting heat, even psychics who could detonate shells mentally. They wrapped engines in asbestos, installed degaussing coils, experimented with wooden aircraft, all futile against radar-based fuses. Ensign Toshio Yoshitake, captured after his aircraft was damaged by proximity fuse fragments, told interrogators, "We were told American gunners were poorly trained and relied on volume, but their shells seemed to know where we were. They would explode all around us, creating walls of metal. Flying through American fire became like flying through a steel storm." The proximity fuse represented remarkable miniaturization and mass production achievement. Each Mark 53 fuse, the most common variant by 1945, contained 134 electronic components assembled with microscopic precision. The complete device had to function after experiencing 20,000 times gravity during firing, spin at 30,000 RPM in flight, and operate in temperatures from -40 to +140 degrees Fahrenheit. Manufacturing required revolutionary techniques. Workers used jeweler's loops to solder connections smaller than rice grains. Quality control tested one of every 500 fuses by actually firing it. Rejection rates initially exceeded 60%, but improved to under 8% by 1945. The battery alone represented breakthrough engineering, a glass ampule of electrolyte that shattered upon firing, activating a wet cell providing power for 20-second flight time. This meant fuses could be stored indefinitely without battery degradation. Western Electric developed special winding techniques for vacuum tubes, supporting elements with microscopic springs that allowed flexing under acceleration without breaking. These modifications enabled hearing aid tubes to survive forces that would crush standard vacuum tubes. Proximity fuses didn't just improve existing tactics, they revolutionized naval anti-aircraft doctrine. Before their introduction, ships relied on barrage fire, creating walls of shells, hoping aircraft would fly through them. This required enormous ammunition expenditure with poor success probability. Commander Joseph Callahan, tactical officer for Task Force 58, explained, "With time-fused shells, we tried hitting a specific point in space at a specific moment, nearly impossible against maneuvering targets. With proximity fuses, we only needed to get shells reasonably close. The fuse handled the rest." Ships developed new firing patterns optimized for proximity fuses. Instead of concentrated barrages, they could engage multiple targets simultaneously with smaller salvos. A destroyer that previously needed 50 rounds for reasonable hit probability could now engage 3 aircraft with the same ammunition. The fuses enabled effective night defense for the first time. Previously, darkness made range estimation nearly impossible for setting time fuses. Proximity fuses eliminated this problem. Shells determined their own detonation point regardless of visibility. Lieutenant Commander Roger Bond, gunnery officer on USS Enterprise, reported, "Night kamikaze attacks had been our nightmare. We'd fire thousands of rounds blindly. With proximity fuses, our night effectiveness jumped from maybe 10% to over 70%. The Japanese virtually abandoned night attacks by mid-1945. By war's end, American factories had produced 22,073,481 proximity fuses, one for every 6 people in Japan. The program employed workers at 87 firms operating 110 facilities, with security rivaling the Manhattan Project. The Crosley Corporation plant in Cincinnati became the largest producer, manufacturing 16,500 units daily at peak production. The factory operated with extraordinary security. Workers entered through guarded gates, surrendered personal items, and worked in windowless rooms, assembling components identified only by code numbers. Quality control exceeded anything previously attempted in mass production. Every 1,000th fuse was test-fired at Aberdeen Proving Ground. If it failed to detonate within specified range, the entire batch was rejected. This stringent testing achieved combat reliability exceeding 95%. The program consumed strategic materials voraciously. Each fuse required small amounts of silver, gold, and platinum for electrical contacts. By 1945, the proximity fuse program used more silver monthly than the entire pre-war American jewelry industry used annually. Both sides recognized the proximity fuse's importance, triggering intense intelligence battles. The Germans had captured examples used against V-1 flying bombs over England and desperately tried developing countermeasures. The Japanese, lacking captured examples, tried piecing together the technology from combat observations and shell fragments. American intelligence implemented extraordinary protection measures. Proximity fuses could only be used over water until late 1944. When USS Drexler sank at Okinawa with magazines full of proximity-fused ammunition, the Navy considered the dangerous operation of demolishing the wreck to prevent recovery. Commander Joseph Rochefort, Pacific Fleet Intelligence Head, coordinated elaborate deception campaigns. False intelligence was leaked, suggesting improved effectiveness came from better training and optical sights. Captured German agents were fed disinformation about magnetic anomaly fuses that detected Earth's magnetic field distortion. The Japanese never acquired an intact proximity fuse during the war. Their best information came from interrogating captured B-29 crew members who had limited knowledge. This led Japanese scientists on futile pursuits developing radio-guided shells. The U.S. Navy's Operational Research Group conducted detailed effectiveness analysis throughout 1945. Their findings, classified until 1958, revealed the proximity fuse's true impact. During pre-proximity fuse operations, October 1944 to January 1945, Kamikaze aircraft achieved 28.7% hit rates, counting both direct strikes and damaging near misses. Ships averaged 312 rounds fired per aircraft destroyed. Destroyer picket ships suffered 1 sunk or severely damaged per 15 kamikaze sorties. After widespread proximity fuse deployment, February to August 1945, kamikaze hit rates dropped to below 10%. Ships averaged 89 rounds per aircraft destroyed, a 71% ammunition efficiency improvement. Destroyer losses dropped to 1 per 47 kamikaze sorties, despite Japanese adoption of more aggressive tactics. Analysis revealed tactical nuances. Proximity fuses proved most effective against high-angle diving attacks, the kamikaze's preferred approach, with success rates exceeding 85% against aircraft diving steeper than 45 degrees. Against low-level approaches, effectiveness dropped but remained superior to conventional ammunition. Captain Willis Lee's April 1945 action report provided specific examples. During 16 April action, this force engaged 43 attacking aircraft. Proximity-fused 5-inch ammunition accounted for 31 confirmed kills at ranges between 4,000 and 9,000 yards. Conventional ammunition fired in parallel achieved 3 kills despite expending 40% more shells. Not every ship immediately mastered proximity fuse employment. The technology required new training, tactics, and maintenance procedures. USS Newcomb's experience illustrated the learning process. Initially, the destroyer's crew set radar-controlled guns for maximum rate continuous fire. This created electromagnetic interference between multiple proximity fuses, actually reducing effectiveness. 5 kamikazes penetrated their defense on April 6, 1945, causing severe damage. Lieutenant Commander Irving McPherson, Newcomb's gunnery officer, reported, "We were firing so many proximity fuses simultaneously they interfered with each other." Radio waves from multiple shells created false returns. We learned to coordinate fire using controlled bursts rather than continuous streams. The Navy rapidly developed new doctrines. Ships designated specific mounts for proximity fuse firing, while others used conventional ammunition. Fire control teams developed pulse patterns, rhythmic firing sequences minimizing interference while maximizing coverage. Maintenance proved equally crucial. The delicate electronics required protection from humidity, salt spray, and temperature extremes. Ships in tropical waters discovered fuses stored in uncooled magazines often failed. Solutions included installing dehumidifiers and temperature controls in ammunition spaces. The proximity fuse program's scale defied comprehension. Manufacturing output: 22,073,481 fuses produced, January 1943 to August 1945. 110 production facilities across 26 states. Peak daily production: 75,000 fuses, all types. 40,000 anti-aircraft fuses daily. Cost: $1.2 billion, 1940s dollars. Material consumption: 12 tons of silver monthly, 800 pounds of gold monthly, 15,000 miles of wire daily, 140 million vacuum tubes total. Quality metrics: 95.3% combat reliability rate, 0.3% premature detonation rate, 4.4% DUD rate, 99.7% storage stability after 1 year. Japanese records captured after surrender revealed the psychological impact of proximity fuses on kamikaze units. The 721st Naval Air Group's war diary, recovered from Kanoya Air Base, contained increasingly desperate entries through 1945. January 1945. Enemy anti-aircraft fire shows marked improvement. Shells detonate by proximity rather than timer. Recommend minimum altitude approach until final run. March 1945. Losses before reaching attack position exceed 60%. Enemy shells create impenetrable barrier around high-value targets. Morale declining as pilots realize death may come without achieving impact. May 1945. Pilots report flying into solid walls of steel. Conventional evasive maneuvers ineffective. Request permission for night attacks exclusively. July 1945. Daily SAIC ration increased. Many volunteers expressing preference for conventional missions despite lower honor. Enemy fire appears guided by supernatural forces. Lieutenant Kiyoshi Ogawa, one of the few kamikaze pilots who survived multiple missions due to mechanical failures, testified after the war. "We expected to die gloriously for the Emperor. Instead, we watched our comrades explode far from their targets, their sacrifice meaningless. It was not battle, but execution." The Mark 53 proximity fuse, standard by 1945, represented extraordinary engineering. Physical specifications: length 3.2 inches, diameter 2.1 inches, weight 11.3 ounces, components 134 individual parts. Electronic systems: oscillator frequency 180 to 220 MHz, power output 0.4 watts, detection range 15 to 70 feet adjustable, battery life 20 to 30 seconds post-activation. Signal processing, 4-stage amplification. Performance parameters: activation setback 20,000 G, spin tolerance 30,000 RPM, temperature range minus 65 degrees Fahrenheit to plus 165 degrees Fahrenheit, humidity resistance 98% at 140 degrees Fahrenheit, shock survival 500 G lateral. The fuse's operation was elegantly simple despite internal complexity. Firing setback shattered the electrolyte ampule, activating the battery. Centrifugal force from shell spin armed the detonator after 0.8 seconds. The oscillator transmitted while the receiver listened for returns. When reflected signal amplitude indicated a target within lethal radius, the therotron switch discharged the firing capacitor. The entire sequence from detection to detonation required 0.0003 seconds. Admiral Richmond Turner, commanding amphibious forces at Okinawa, credited proximity fuses with making the invasion possible. Without proximity fuses, I estimate our losses would have exceeded 150 ships sunk. The invasion might have failed. This technology saved tens of thousands of American lives. The proximity fuse's effectiveness influenced Japanese strategic decisions. Emperor Hirohito's surrender announcement mentioned a new and most cruel bomb, atomic weapons, but Japanese military records showed equal concern about conventional defense improvements. An Imperial Navy staff study from July 1945 concluded, enemy anti-aircraft capabilities have progressed where special attack operations no longer achieve favorable exchange ratios. Post-war strategic bombing survey interviews revealed the proximity fuse's strategic impact. Admiral Somu Toyoda, Chief of Naval General Staff, stated, "We calculated 500 special attack aircraft could destroy 100 American ships at Okinawa. Due to their new anti-aircraft weapons, 500 aircraft achieved less than 30 ships seriously damaged. This failure made continuation mathematically impossible." The proximity fuse program's economics proved remarkably favorable. Investment returns. Program cost, $1.2 billion. Estimated ships saved, 200-plus major vessels. Replacement cost of saved ships, $8 billion. Lives saved, 40,000 to 60,000, estimated. Medical/disability costs avoided, $2 billion. Operational efficiency ammunition expenditure reduced 70%. Magazine space requirements decreased 60%. Gun crew fatigue reduced 50%. Engagement time per target reduced 65%. Exchange ratios. 1 proximity fuse, $18. 1 5-inch shell, $12. Combined cost, $30. Average Kamikaze aircraft, $15,000. Exchange ratio, 500 to 1 favorable. By July 1945, proximity fuses had become so effective that Japanese tactics underwent radical revision. Operation Ketsugo, the plan for defending the home islands, abandoned massed daylight kamikaze attacks entirely, emphasizing night attacks, ultra-low approaches, and poor weather exploitation. Vice Admiral Matome Ugaki, commanding Special Attack Forces, wrote in his diary July 24, 1945, "The Americans have developed a defense we cannot penetrate. Our young men die in vain, exploding in empty sky far from targets. We must find new methods or abandon special attacks." The Japanese developed Operation Tsurugi, suicide attacks using stripped fighters flying at wave-top height to avoid radar detection. Aircraft would approach below 50 feet, climbing only seconds before impact. This showed promise in limited trials, but Japan surrendered before implementation. Japanese scientists worked frantically on electronic countermeasures. Project Yashima attempted developing jamming transmitters for proximity fuse frequencies. Laboratory tests showed promise, but Japan lacked industrial capacity for meaningful production. Their best prototype weighed 200 pounds and required its own aircraft, defeating the purpose. The proximity fuse's success triggered rapid technology transfer across Allied forces. British forces used ground-based anti-aircraft guns with proximity fuses to destroy 79% of V-1 flying bombs targeting London after December 1944. Soviet forces, provided 25,000 proximity fuses under Lend-Lease, reported similar success over Eastern Front cities. The technology spawned immediate innovations. By war's end, American scientists had developed proximity fuses for aerial rockets, naval rockets, artillery shells, mortar rounds, and aerial bombs. Each application required unique modifications: rocket fuses for higher velocities, artillery fuses with ground return filters, bomb fuses with barometric switches preventing high-altitude detonation. Unknown to Americans, Germany had independently developed proximity fuses, illustrating the difference between invention and production. The German Kranich fuse used capacitive sensing, detecting electrical field disturbance caused by aircraft proximity. The German design was arguably more elegant, requiring only 23 components versus the American fuse's 134. But it proved impossible to mass produce with German methods. Total German production reached only 8,000 units before war's end, compared to America's 22 million. Dr. Hubert Schardin, lead German proximity fuse scientist, wrote post-war, "We solved the theoretical problem in 1940, before the Americans began." But theory without production capacity is merely interesting. The Americans built in one day what took us a month. Statistical analysis reveals the proximity fuse's role in preventing catastrophic casualties during the planned invasion of Japan. Operation Downfall, scheduled for November 1945, anticipated 5,000 to 10,000 kamikaze aircraft attacking the invasion fleet. Pre-proximity fuse loss rates suggested 400 to 500 ships sunk or severely damaged with 100,000 naval casualties. With proximity fuses, planners reduced estimates to 100 to 150 ships lost and 25,000 casualties, still horrific but manageable. The atomic bomb's use eliminated the need to test these projections, but Okinawa experience suggested even reduced estimates were pessimistic. Individual ship experiences illustrated lives saved. USS Aaron Ward, attacked by multiple kamikazes on May 3, 1945, shot down 6 with proximity-fused ammunition despite suffering damage from 3 hits. Statistical analysis suggested that without proximity fuses, most attacking aircraft would have struck home, likely sinking the ship with heavy casualties. Gunner's mate Aristides Footrides, who commanded Mount 52 during USS Laffey's ordeal, later calculated, "Computer analysis in the 1970s showed that with conventional ammunition, we would have been hit by 14 kamikazes instead of 6. No ship survives 14 kamikaze hits. Every man aboard owed his life to proximity fuses." Fire controlman Lawrence Delowski added, "The proximity fuse gave us hope. Before, when radar showed 50 bogies incoming, we knew most would get through. After VT fuses, we had confidence. The technology was on our side." The proximity fuse program advanced multiple technological fields by decades. Miniaturization requirements pioneered techniques later used in transistor development. Mass production methods presaged modern electronics manufacturing. Quality control standards established benchmarks still used in aerospace. Dr. James Van Allen reflected in 1980, "The proximity fuse program was the Manhattan Project of electronics. We compressed 20 years of development into 24 months. Every cell phone, every computer, every piece of modern electronics owes something to manufacturing techniques we pioneered." The program produced 87 patents, established 12 new manufacturing processes, and trained thousands in precision electronics assembly. Post-war, these workers formed America's electronics industry core. Companies like Texas Instruments, Fairchild Semiconductor, and Intel traced origins to proximity fuse manufacturers. Japan's post-war evaluation appeared in the 1952 War History series published by the Japanese Defense Agency. The analysis concluded proximity fuses had fundamentally altered the mathematics of special attack operations, rendering them strategically ineffective by March 1945. Captain Rikihei Inaguchi, senior kamikaze operations staff officer, wrote in 1958, "The proximity fuse was not merely technical improvement, but paradigm shift. It transformed anti-aircraft fire from probability-based to deterministic. Our pilots faced not random death, but systematic destruction. Admiral Takejiro Onishi, the Kamikaze program's father, committed suicide August 16, 1945. His note read partially, "I apologize to the souls of my brave subordinates and their bereaved families for sending them to deaths that achieved nothing. Historians believe proximity fuse effectiveness contributed to his despair." Throughout 1945, proximity fuses underwent continuous improvement based on combat experience. The Mark 58, introduced May 1945, incorporated Okinawa lessons. Improved discrimination circuits reducing cloud triggering 90%, variable sensitivity settings for different target sizes, enhanced countermeasures defeating Japanese jamming attempts, extended battery life reaching 35 seconds, miniaturized components reducing weight to 9.8 ounces. The Mark 59, ready when Japan surrendered, would have incorporated microalloy vacuum tubes, increasing reliability to 99.2% while reducing cost to $11 per unit. The proximity fuse program demonstrated American industrial adaptability. Factories that had never produced electronics transformed overnight into precision manufacturers. Zenith Radio Corporation's Chicago plant converted from home radios to proximity fuses in 6 weeks. The program required unprecedented cooperation between competitors. RCA, Westinghouse, General Electric, and Sylvania shared patents and manufacturing techniques freely. Trade secrets closely guarded in peacetime were published in weekly bulletins distributed to all manufacturers. The proximity fuse's Pacific War impact in definitive numbers. Combat performance, 22,073,481 fuses produced. 5.3 million fired in combat. 7 times effectiveness increase over conventional fuses. 70% reduction in ammunition expenditure. Lives and ships saved, estimated. 40,000 to 60,000 American lives. 200 plus major warships. 500 plus smaller vessels. Japanese losses attributed to proximity fuses. 2,800 plus aircraft destroyed. 4,200 plus pilots killed. Kamikaze effectiveness reduced from 28.7% to below 10%. Economic impact, $1.2 billion investment, $10 billion in prevented losses. 8.3 to 1 return on investment. Admiral Mark Mitcher, Task Force 58 commander, submitted his final action report August 20, 1945. The proximity fuse was the decisive technology in defeating Japanese special attack tactics. Without it, our losses would have been unsustainable. With it, kamikaze attacks became an exercise in enemy attrition. In the war's final month, Japanese kamikaze units achieved only 2.8% success rates. 97 of every 100 pilots died without reaching targets. The proximity fuse had transformed the kamikaze from unstoppable force into predictably defeated tactic. Captain Joseph Enright, commanding USS Archerfish, provided eloquent summary. The proximity fuse didn't just shoot down planes. It shot down an entire military philosophy. The Japanese believed spiritual superiority could overcome material disadvantage. The proximity fuse proved that technology, properly applied, defeats fanaticism. The proximity fuse established principles still governing military technology. Miniaturization multiplies power. Fitting radar into shells proved size reduction multiplies military effectiveness. Every modern smart weapon traces lineage to proximity fuses. Production wins wars. Germany's superior design meant nothing without production capacity. America's ability to manufacture millions of complex devices proved decisive. Integration over innovation. The proximity fuse contained no revolutionary components, just existing technologies brilliantly integrated. Modern doctrine emphasizes system integration over breakthrough innovation. Automation saves lives. Removing human decision-making from split-second combat dramatically improved effectiveness. Today's automated defense systems follow proximity fuse principles. The radar proximity fuse stands as World War II's most decisive yet underappreciated technology. While the atomic bomb ended the war dramatically, proximity fuses had already made invasion of Japan feasible by neutralizing the kamikaze threat. Without them, American casualties might have reached levels making continued war politically impossible. The numbers tell only part of the story. Behind every statistic were young Americans who lived because shells exploded at precisely the right moment, and young Japanese who died without achieving their sacrifice's purpose. The proximity fuse transformed the Pacific War's final act from mutual slaughter into technological dominance so complete that further resistance became meaningless. The proximity fuse was more than a weapon. It was American industrial and scientific supremacy made manifest. It declared that no amount of courage, no willingness to die, no spiritual devotion could overcome the material advantages of a fully mobilized democracy. The kamikaze pilots offered their lives. The proximity fuse made that offer irrelevant. Sailors who watched kamikazes disintegrate in mid-air, workers who assembled components without knowing their purpose, scientists who solved impossible problems, all were part of democracy's answer to totalitarian fanaticism. That answer, delivered through 22 million proximity fuses, was simple. American technology would protect American lives regardless of the price enemies were willing to pay. The proximity fuse had done more than destroy aircraft. It destroyed the fundamental premise of kamikaze warfare, that spiritual determination could overcome material disadvantage. Against American radar, miniaturized and mass-produced, the divine wind dissipated into historical footnote. The rising sun set on Japanese military ambitions, brought down by radio waves and vacuum tubes smaller than a sake cup. The final irony was complete. Japan attacked Pearl Harbor to prevent American interference in their expansion. They ended the war watching their most dedicated warriors explode harmlessly in empty sky, destroyed by American technology so advanced it seemed supernatural. The proximity fuse transformed their ultimate sacrifice into ultimate futility. The radar proximity fuse was democracy's perfect weapon against fanaticism, not matching sacrifice for sacrifice, but making sacrifice irrelevant through superior technology. It won through production rather than destruction, innovation rather than immolation, protecting life rather than glorifying death. In that victory lay not just the Pacific War's end, but the template for American military supremacy continuing today. The kamikaze came to die. The proximity fuse ensured they died achieving nothing. In that reality lay Imperial Japan's defeat and American democracy's triumph, measured not in courage but in electronics, not in spirit but in science, not in death but in the technology that prevented it.